Welcome back to another episode of the Theological Arsonist. I'm your host, Jonah Saller. I'm glad that you could join me today. Listen, if you have been supporting me over the past year that I have been doing this, I am so grateful to you. And I just want to extend my thank you. I want to especially thank my Patreons who are giving financially to support my ministry. If you would like to do the same, please click in the description below the link to my Patreon. You can find it via my website. You can find it via the YouTube description. You can find it in the corner of the YouTube cover photo. There are plenty of ways you can find it if you would like to give. And once you get to that site, you can put in either one of the tiers or whatever amount that you are feeling led by God to give. I appreciate each and every one who does this. With that being said, let's get into the topic. This episode is going to be intense. It's something that I've been thinking about for a while. It's something that I have been angered about, I believe righteously, and something that I think we need to address swiftly and quickly. So without further ado, let's get started. By what standard? That is the question we must ask ourselves today. As the world spins on its axis and people live and die, we must ask the question, by what standard? The reason we must ask that question, and ask it often, is precisely because the world spins on its axis, consistently, predictably, and orderly. The reason we must ask that question is because people live and die consistently, predictably, and orderly. And while people live, they act as though they have purpose, meaning, value, and they live as though the world around them naturally makes sense. When people die, we bury them, and we often try to move on as quickly as we can because we don't like, or some of us don't want, to think about death. But it remains that it looms on the horizon for all of us and is a necessary end. When somebody makes a moral claim, we need to ask them by what standard. When somebody makes a scientific claim, we need to ask by what standard. When somebody appeals to any form of truth, we need to ask them by what standard. This is truly an essential question that we as Christians need to ask. Now, someone listening might quip back, why do we need to ask it? Why don't you just let everyone live their own truth? Have you heard that one before? Live your own truth? That statement is the problem. And that statement is sitting there. It's like that massive heap of dino dung in the Jurassic Park movie. It's smelling of death, and yet ignored and stepped around by the vast majority of humanity. The statement, live your own truth, is an incredibly asinine statement. Truth is not a matter of personal preference. If it was, it would not be truth. Truth is not yours or mine, and it does not belong to an individual creature. Truth, at its core, is objective, absolute, and is the final standard by which we assess and interact with the reality that we find ourselves in. We may not like the truth, but it remains the truth regardless of our preferences. Someone may attempt to throw down this appeal to ultimate authority by saying there is no such thing as absolute truth. I'd simply ask back, is that true? I want you to notice that since I have begun to speak, I have made countless truth claims and will continue to do so until I conclude this podcast. Even the claim that there is no truth is a truth claim, thus it refutes itself. Truth exists whether we like it or not. Because of that, we must then ask the question, what is truth, and by what standard are we measuring it? I will be as blatant as I possibly can at this moment. The standard by which we measure truth is the infallible, all-powerful, eternal God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's the standard. That is the truth. Whether you or I like it or not, we are living in God's world as part of His creation. And as such, we are called to recognize and submit to His lordship over all things. Now, it's around this time that the protesters will start to object. You can't force your worldview on everyone. It's not fair to individual freedom. This objection is meaningless, however, because it can be quenched with, by what standard am I being unfair? It's a simple question, and one that objectors will not be able to answer. Even those who try will be forced to appeal to the God that they know exists just to establish their definition of unfair. They'll be forced to make truth claims that they can't justify without Him. They'll relentlessly point out moral objections to God that they can't ground in any objective standard. They won't even be able to explain to me why their reasoning can be trusted without appealing to God. This is the inescapable reality that we all live in. Neutrality cannot and is not an option. You are either on the side of God or you are a son of disobedience, doomed for destruction. Those are the only options. Unfortunately, there are many people today who are currently the sons of disobedience. These are the people who cannot answer the question, by what standard? They refuse to acknowledge their Creator, and as a result, they have been handed over to a depraved mind, bearing the fruit of the phrase, live your own truth. These are the people that condemn a cartoon skunk for promoting rape culture while celebrating a Grammy performance of sluts graphically depicting sexual acts. These are the people that scream for justice within the black community while funding and promoting Planned Parenthood as they rip black children from the womb, limb to limb. These are the people that believe in women's rights while promoting that a confused man can and should be allowed to compete in women's sports. This is what happens to a world that answers the question, by what standard, by saying, by my standard. Let those words sink in. By my standard. There once was a serpent who said the same thing. Not verbatim, but pretty close. Did God actually say? In other words, is God actually the standard? Eating the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is a dangerous game, because through it eyes become open to both good and evil. When this reality happened in the garden, and Eve took and ate and gave to her husband, and he took and ate, it was a fundamental rejection of the standard God and a proclamation by my standard. This is what we see people touting today. Brothers and sisters, the smoke is rising. Can't you see it? Can't you smell it? The way our country is going cannot be sustained. Unfortunately, instead of running in with the living water of the gospel that is poured out for the healing of the nations, many so-called Christians are leaving that behind to link arms with the woke, liberal, standardless agenda. Imagine leaving the only standard that one can reason from to step on a desolate and damning worldview, claiming that through it we can all find common ground, unity, and tolerance. Frankly, it's repulsive. Can a child of God find common ground with a child of the devil? This is how we need to see things, because it's extremely black and white. Either you are alive in Christ, or you are a dead child of wrath and disobedience. There is no common ground between God-haters and God-fearers. There is no common ground between the spirit and the flesh. This is the biblical testimony. The sooner that we realize this reality, the sooner we will quit fooling around with the notion that somehow if we find common ground, unity, and tolerance, we will live in a better world. That is a lie from the pit of hell, and it will damn those who believe it. There is no unity apart from the gospel, because the gospel is the truth. The gospel is the standard in a standardless world. The gospel speaks to humanity of their depravity before the Creator. It shows them the standard of perfect righteousness and holiness. It shows them their hopelessness of ever achieving that righteousness and holiness on their own. And when this hopelessness begins to creep into the mind, the gospel leads them to the foot of a cross, where that same Creator God of the whole entire universe was crucified as the God-man Jesus Christ, atoning for sin and giving humanity his righteousness so that he might reconcile the world unto himself and make us partakers of the divine nature. That message are the leaves that come from the tree of life, given for the healing of the nations. It is that message alone that can rip through the most wicked God-hater, radically turning them into a God-lover. It is the removal of the heart of stone that is replaced with a heart of flesh. Do not miss this. It is truly the gospel or death, the gospel and life, or sin and death. Brothers and sisters, watch the world around you. Watch the individuals you come in contact with every single day. People know, they know that they are more than just dust in the wind. They have ambitions, they have goals, they have dreams. They have morals and they desire justice. These humans, who are currently children of wrath, as we all once were, as the testimony of Ephesians 2 tells us, these humans cannot help but express what they were designed for, to bear the image of God. Even though it is distorted by sin, it does not change the fact that this is what humanity was created for, to bear the image of their Creator. So Christians, my call to you today is to stop trying to heal the world by linking arms with the dead. Stop trying to find common ground with devils in the name of unity, and start preaching Christ. Start exposing this worldview of death for what it is, a standardless and destructive worldview that cannot account for the very breath that they breathe. Start asking the question, by what standard? Start asking them, by what standard are you telling me that that is truth? By what standard is that right? By what standard is that wrong? When these people come up short, point them to a man, a God-man, named Jesus Christ.